Hi, everyone. Thank you so very much for joining us to our very special panel discussion today on breaking echo chambers, knowledge, innovating knowledge sharing and in through the islands or inter-island knowledge sharing, as I should say. Thank you so much for joining us. We're just going to wait probably 1 or 2 minutes to flesh out the attendees a bit more. But what we'll do in the interim is we'll pull up a poll so that you can let us know where you're joining us from. And then also, if you can, in the chat, just say a little bit about yourself, where you're coming from again, and what you do, so that the other attendees can get to know who is joining us for this session. Just a few housekeeping rules. Obviously, you will be muted with your camera off, but we don't want that to really sort of stymie your engagement with this session. We want to keep this as informal as possible, as well as with a lot of engagement from the audience. So when you are posing your questions, you can pose them using the option of all panelists and attendees. And that's because Zoom automatically puts the option of all panelists. So instead of sending your question directly to just us, you can send them to all the people attending. So you might get some conversation, you can get other people seeing what you're asking, so they themselves may not ask the same question as well. And so we're going to start with introductions fairly shortly, where I'll introduce each of our panelists. And then we'll give them a bit of a question to start things off. And then we'll open up the panel discussion for the audience as well to pitch in your questions, which we will then tackle. Now, I see that we have a good sort of sense from the Caribbean, which is good because most of us in here are from the Caribbean. I would say all of us here are from the Caribbean. We were meant to have someone from Micronesia, but unfortunately, she had to not join us at the very last minute due to unforeseen circumstances. So this is a Caribbean-centric-ish panel. However, by all means, we would love to learn more about things and islands and communities that are outside of the region in terms of your experiences. We have people from Europe as well, the Pacific, we have Asia, and North America. So by all means, feel free to share as much as possible. So I'll go ahead and get started. We still have some people filtering in, but for the sake of time, I'll go ahead and get started by introducing CESaRE. So I'm from the Journal of CESaRE, which stands for Caribbean Environmental Sciences and Renewable Energy. And we were founded in 2017, pretty much on the premise of how do we innovate knowledge sharing, wearing an academic hat. We are very much concerned on the Caribbean academia being sort of stagnated, being sort of one where we're not really connecting to the right audiences. We're not really translating our work into something of meaningful impact. And that's not to say that people aren't. I'm just saying that we could do a lot better as a region, especially as academic institutions that constantly need to keep abreast with industry trends, etc. So we were founded in 2017, and that is why we really sort of wanted to have Island Innovation work with us with a panel session like this. And they've been gracious enough to give us this spot where we're looking at how do we break echo chambers, and we'll get into echo chambers and what that means to you as well as collectively, as well as how do we then innovate communication processes and tools within the region as well as outside of the region and through inter-island exchange. We're also joined by BECT, which is the Barbados Environmental Conservation Trust. And my co-moderator is Tamisha, who will be helping me with the audience questions, etc., as we go along. But they were established in 2019, and they've largely worked through initiatives on the ground in Barbados to support national development goals through sustainable measures and sort of grassroots initiatives. And they are a member also of the Conservation Collective, which also includes a lot of other communities, a lot of other places, and many other islands as well. So with that, we will start off by introducing each of the panelists. We'll give them some time to really talk about their experience and what it means to them to really speak about knowledge sharing, either through the good and the bad. So I'm going to start with Omar Muhammad, who is from Trinidad and Tobago. Omar is the CEO of the Cropper Foundation, which many of you may have heard about. He is doing his MSc at the University of Cambridge in the UK. And he is working with the Cropper Foundation that is very much based on responsible development and impact, which is a key sort of word that we're going to use throughout this panel, impact. Hi, Omar, see you there. We're going to then have a look, perhaps, what the Cropper Foundation, in terms of his experiences there, translates to what we're trying to discuss today. So, Omar, yeah, the spotlight is on you now. Based on some of your challenges that you've had in knowledge sharing, particularly focused with the Cropper Foundation, particularly with the Cropper Foundation's new initiative called the Safe Food Challenge, what are some of the sort of roadblocks that you really see in terms of knowledge sharing within Trinidad and Tobago, the Caribbean, and what do you see, how does that translate across other islands?
Great, thanks so much, Masao. Hi, everyone. Hi to all our panelists, all our attendees, and this amazing ongoing conference, which I think is close to 10,000 persons this year who may be attending. About knowledge sharing, well, you know, as you said, Masao, I'm the CEO of the Cropper Foundation, which we are celebrating our 21st year, actually just a couple of weeks ago. And we are predominantly a Caribbean institution, and we work towards advancing the cause of Caribbean sustainability using, in many cases, Caribbean ideas and Caribbean talent. We feel very strongly about that. And a large part of our work really came out of the ethos of our founders, which was about catalyzing new thoughts and new experiences in the Caribbean. And a big part of that is knowledge sharing, because you can't really catalyze something if people don't know about it. And I think for us, you know, one of my mentors had a saying that I'm going to paraphrase, that, you know, as islands in the Caribbean and in many other islands around the world, you know, we've been, you know, really sort of identified out of our colonial history and, you know, very short sort of independence history since then. And, you know, she said, you know, one of the most radical things we can do as Caribbean people, and, you know, I would say small island developing states people, is work together. Because so much of our history has been really premised on keeping us from working together and talking to one another. And I think that history has sort of permeated until today, where, you know, in terms of echo chambers, talking to one another, it's very closely related to working with one another. Because talking is just that first step before actually, you know, doing the work. And I think that history of keeping people apart has really kept going. And I think there is a certain level of unwillingness to take that extra step forward into truly transcending from talk to action outside of whatever circle you might be in. And that can be sectoral or even issue-based or whatever. Because, you know, NGOs, civil society, which I would most likely speak from, are distrustful of government. Government thinks that civil society are a bunch of just do-gooders that don't really have a lot of technical skills. Private sector is somewhere in the middle. You know, people think private sector are just doing things for CSR. All these stereotypes, I think, really keep people from, you know, entering these sorts of relationships with some sense of understanding that, you know, people are willing to work together. And I think those stereotypes have really impacted on the way those different sectors of development work. And it's extremely hard to get over a lot of those stereotypes, because in many cases, they do prove true from time to time. And I think, you know, as experiences are passed down, you sort of have this, you know, sort of generation of folks who thinks, well, I'm not going to work with the state. Well, I can't work with the state. Or private sector says, well, I can't work with academia, or whatever those stereotypes are. And I think breaking that is probably our biggest opportunity to actually break these echo chambers. And I think, so what we do at the Cropper Foundation, and my own sort of personal philosophy, is almost this, almost, I think, approaching it with a sense of, I would say, like, very transparent naivety. Like, I'm just going to assume that everyone is willing to work together. And I mean, sometimes I am disappointed, but we have, over the last couple of years, really approached this idea of working together with the assumption that everyone wants to work together for the common good. And in most cases, it has paid off. I think the idea is to, plan your projects, plan your programs in a way that brings in all aspects of your development partners and what the development environment looks like, and give them the opportunity in a bunch of different configurations to have a voice at the table and to be present for your own messaging around whatever you're trying to work on. And I think that idea of prior authorization and prior collaboration really helps bridge those gaps. So you're not just preaching to your own choir, but you have everyone around that table. And I think that idea of, sort of naively going into this with the idea that everyone wants to work together has worked well for us. And I think that hopeful optimism transcends and I think permeates into what the work actually looks like. And I think, if your partners really believe that you're in this to work together and to bridge those gaps, that it does sort of evolve the way the work happens. So for us, I think that's been one of the biggest lessons that we've learned, that, again, you need to bring everyone around the table. If it isn't happening, we have the opportunities to do so ourselves. Don't just wait for someone else to bring everyone around the table. And I think, it provides good leadership opportunities for organizations to step out there. And I think also because I'm sure someone else is probably going to talk about this, but another big lesson that we've learned, again, is, embracing this idea of diversity and making sure that if you are bringing people around the table, it's not just people from different organizations who just happen to have the same experiences that you have, but to try really hard to, if you are bringing voices, try and bring as many diverse voices as possible. Because that's really how the message gets, as widely dispersed as possible. So for me, I think those have been two of the biggest lessons that we've learned over the last couple of years. And I think for me personally, what I say, transparent naivety has really paid off. And I think it's one of the few ways, I think, to be able to deal with what in many cases is a lot of stress and a lot of heartache when it comes to working in this particular field. And I think it works well for your organization, and I think it works well for you too as a person. So I think I'll stop there, and then we can talk about some of these things later on.
Well, you still have just 2 minutes before I let you off the hook. So yeah, here's the hard question time. So you mentioned this sort of transparent naivety, and then you also mentioned, academia, industry, as well as the private sector and NGOs coming together. Who is the biggest culprit, you think, in terms of knowledge sharing, as it pertains probably to the Caribbean?
Well, I was just having this discussion yesterday with a bunch of groups. I think everyone, because we still don't understand how data and knowledge is used, because someone can put out a great report, but if it's a non-searchable PDF, what use is that to me? In all limited time, if I can't control F to find a word, I'm not reading a 200-page report on a Friday evening. And I think, again, it comes down to this idea of we're very comfortable working in silos. So government produces reports that are very fit for government purpose. Civil society thinks that let's just talk to the persons in our network over social media or whatnot. And that's good enough for us. Because, again, stereotypes, well, we're not going to change anyone else's mind, so let's just talk to this particular group. But if I had to, be held at ransom to choose someone, I might say, state agencies are still maybe a little bit behind, even in terms of communication across the board, using social media. I mean, in Trinidad and Tobago, I think they have been doing a pretty good job, and I know like 1 or 2 agencies in Jamaica as well have been doing a really good job on social media. But I think on average, most learnings are still it's done in a report that's probably sent to cabinet and you never see the light of day. Yeah. So it's either hidden behind something, or it's not publicly available, or if it's available, it's not available at any sort of digestible format whatsoever.
Right. Yeah, those are some great takeaways. And I love how you mentioned Jamaica and Trinidad, because I remember when I lived in Jamaica, I was quite impressed by the PA system that will translate it into patois, depending on, what they're trying to give out. But it was a health communication, in patois. I'm not even going to try it because I will embarrass myself. But basically, realizing that there are different audiences and how they digest information. And you can't just exclude them by sticking on one track sort of mindset just because of that's how it was done in the past. Yeah. So that's really good. And you also mentioned a really good point that I'm going to use to introduce our next panelist, where we talk about the sort of hidden side of data, the lack of data, I would probably say as well, and the sort of lack of access of data. And I only say this because, Fran, you're working in an organization called Climate Analytics, and you can't have analytics if you don't have data. But our next panelist is Fran Fuller, who is also an advisor at the Alliance of Small Island States. You're a director at Climate Analytics in New York. And I believe you were in the UN before, as well as the European Energy Center, yes? Yes, I think I did my full LinkedIn review properly. So based on your experience, especially as it pertains to climate and energy, what do you think we can do more in terms of creating measurable impact through events like this? Now that's a broad, I really give you a loaded question, sorry. Digest that how you will. But yeah, that's something I think we would like to hear about a bit.
Thank you. Thanks, Masao. And I guess, first of all, thank you for inviting me to participate in today's session. As Masao noted, I'm Fran Fuller, Director of Climate Analytics New York office. And also I have been, because I am originally from Antigua and Barbuda, seconded to the Alliance of Small Island States as Antigua and Barbuda chairs for the years of 2021 and 2022. I've been working in environment, climate change, and sustainable development issues for about 15 years, and mainly in the Caribbean. And I'm going to focus a little more on our work at Climate Analytics, but reflecting on, I guess, the work over the past 15 years. Climate Analytics is a nonprofit that's motivated by the desire to empower the most vulnerable, especially SIDS. So we undertake extensive research on the 1.5 temperature limit in the Paris Agreement and the risks and vulnerabilities that countries face. And we have offices in Germany, Australia, Nepal, Togo, which is in West Africa, and most recently established an office in Trinidad and Tobago. Small office, but just established, and it'll hopefully be working a lot more in the region in the coming years. Most of my work within Climate Analytics has been within the team that's called the Implementation Strategies team, where we focus on bringing the diverse array of work of the global organization through the diplomacy team, so understanding what's being negotiated at the UN under the Paris Agreement, our climate policy team, so a lot of energy system modeling, understanding where the world needs to go to get on 1.5, and then our science team, which obviously does a significant amount of research to basically support countries on the ground in the implementation of national and regional action and in the implementation of their commitments towards the Paris Agreement. So I guess now to the point of this session, and I'll bring in those questions you asked around data and especially on energy. What does effective knowledge sharing mean to me in the context of SIDS? We try where as much as possible to work and think it's a critical component of our work as an international organization now with a regional base, to build really trusted relationships through our network of partners on the ground and in with regions. So for us, it's essential to have partners in country and in the region. Right now, those include University of the West Indies, the UNFCCC's regional climate change regional collaboration center that's based in Grenada. And they're doing incredible work around, especially on data and supporting the region on that. To the Secretariat for the Pacific Regional Environment Program, SPREP in the Pacific. We're also members of some other collaborative groupings, including the Climate Finance Access Network, the NDC Partnership. And our objective through that is to ensure that we work with partners to avoid duplication and build synergies of our work through country-driven approaches. And there, in discussing the direction of the implementation strategies work, it's kind of three critical cornerstones where we do try to break the echo chamber and build knowledge sharing. And that is one, always ensuring it's country-driven approaches, trying to embed yourselves and put yourselves in the national or regional context and always work through that space. Another cornerstone of our work globally is taking and advising on Paris-compatible science-based approaches. So always looking at the objective of the 1.5 and impacts of anything outside of that, which is obviously devastating for SIDS, as you would have seen, especially in the report of the Working Group 1 of the IPCC that recently was published. And then all of this is underpinned through multi-stakeholder engagement. And we try and embed capacity building and training in everything that we do, while noting, obviously, our partnering country is critical in ensuring the right persons are in the room, because we don't necessarily understand the specificities of each country. But I would say while trying to do that and getting more community level engagement, major challenges still exist. And from a general standpoint, I would say that we are not effective enough. In many situations, we tend to speak in an echo chamber, and we tend to technocrats speak to technocrats. And some of the challenges that we've seen and coming, I think the first one I'll raise as it relates to the data and energy is, the continued insistence on many donors to use, I say donors and funding agencies, whether it's the Green Climate Fund or the World Bank, to use traditional science. Most of our countries are so tiny in the region that localized and downscaled modeling doesn't exist. Yeah. It doesn't exist for your national level, let alone for a sub-region or a community-based, organization. And, the insistence on using traditional science rather than citizen science and understanding the role that local communities, community-based organizations, faith-based groups, that can play in building that understanding and building that science into, because also I think the impacts that we're seeing on the ground are far-reaching what has been projected thus far. Yeah. So another thing I've seen is funding arrangements. Most donors, most major donors still have funding arrangements in place that make it challenging to embed and bring in small scale or our smaller communities, other organizations that are outside of your development bank and your ministries or your large national trusts, basically. And even then, many national trusts, at least in the lesser Antilles and in the OECS, aren't even big enough to gain access to a lot of like GCF funds, even when on granted, because they don't meet the fiscal requirements that are there in place. And so there are a lot of arrangements that I would say are still being pushed back and still being asked to be reduced to allow for access to other organizations. And as such, it is more challenging to continue to engage smaller scale organizations because our capacity in the region is limited at best. I would say most recently I've been working on a regional initiative through Canary to support the access to climate finance with CSOs in the region. And through that, it's been seen, to have some really big hurdles to overcome. And most CSOs in the region don't gain access to more than like 50,000 US at the very best in terms of implementing climate action. And even those are the big regional or big national CSOs. And, while as it relates to climate change and overcoming the challenge that we have ahead of us, it is critical for major organizations, major corporations, the fossil fuel industry, and of course, major emitters like the US, the EU, et cetera, to take action on climate change. We can't discount the impact that a whole of society approach can have, and the impact that faith-based organizations, small-scale farmers, fisher folk can have in, yes, taking action on climate change and reducing emissions, but also building the resilience to the impact. And as technical individuals, we definitely need to do better on that. I didn't touch the energy point. I don't know if you wanted me to jump a little more into that.
We definitely can come back to that, because I think my question, if we had a little bit more time, was specifically going to be on capacity building around energy. So don't worry, you're not getting away from that one just yet, don't worry. But thanks so much, Fran. Just going to jump to the next panelist, who is Nishadeen. Nisha, you can turn on your camera and join us now. And Nisha is chairperson at BECT. She was also the previous CEO at Tupagai Publishing. Previous or current?
Well, previous.
Previous, okay, that seemed a bit tricky. And definitely at the helm of one of the biggest and most successful magazines in the Caribbean, Mako Magazine. Trust me, I think I'm still dreaming of a Mako house right now. I would have had a different background if I had a Mako house. So I really would like to welcome you to the discussion. And I actually, while sort of researching your background, I've stumbled upon a VOC, or Voice of the Caribbean radio session that you did. That's still on the interwebs, yeah. And you had a statement there that opportunity does not knock, and that you really do have to seize it. And that took with me and resonated with me. And another point that you said was that you really want a platform for the Caribbean to showcase itself on the international stage where we can really be proud of it. And I think that goes for all islands. Very often we have this sort of North American or European centric view of how things should look. And, very often if a keynote speaker is from there, great, we're attending. If the Caribbean person is there, okay, maybe I'll see what I'm doing, blah, blah, blah. And I think we have just so much talent coming out of islands. We have so many brilliant minds that that resonated with me, especially with what we do at CESaRE. So with that, I'm going to jump into the question that I'm going to pose to you. And that really has to probably push more on the funding angle. And based on your work in communications and marketing, how can we translate that into climate and energy marketing and communications so that we can really build confidence with funders and we can really draw in more sort of financial unlocking mechanisms?
Great question, and good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me. So unlike the rest of my esteemed panelists, I have not been in this climate change, sustainable development space for a long time. I have been in fundraising. I've been a fundraiser for charities for going on 30 years. And one of the biggest issues that we have here in the Caribbean are, well, two things. One, I don't see any of the islands really working together when it comes to focusing on one or two issues and getting funding globally. And the next thing is that I also see, for instance, here in Barbados, we're so small and we have so many different projects or initiatives almost competing against each other. Yeah. So for us at the Barbados Environmental Conservation Trust, all we do is fund projects, grassroots projects, local initiatives that we think with a little bit of money, it could just really, really have the biggest impact on island. But what we also see, and I think Tamaisha hopefully would address this, and she could speak way more about this than I can, is that if we get some of these local initiatives to start working together, they would be a much stronger force to deal with. And for then us as funders, it would be a lot easier for us to fund projects where we have different organizations working together, which will cause even greater impact. And then in terms of, when I was in my former life, when I was a magazine publisher, one of the things I always used to say about us in the Caribbean is that we always sort of feel that everything foreign is better. And we look outside of our waters and appreciate everything that happens outside and not really value what we have here. Now, when it comes to communication, let's say in the magazine industry, I actually had to educate my advertisers in the Caribbean on the value of spending their entire annual marketing budget on one page in a magazine. And in your space, I don't think that there is enough communication, or for lack of a better word, advertising to the people on the ground, to your students, to your just the masses. So they don't quite understand what it is that they need to do and what impact it would have. Barbados, I think, is the 12th most scarce nation when it comes to water. We just simply we don't have a lot of potable water. And so during dry season, we have major water outages. But the communication, whether it be from the state or whether it be from NGOs on water conservation, is almost null and void. Right. So for an organization like the Barbados Environmental Conservation Trust, if we fund a project that helps a community or a parish here in Barbados to have water and to help with their water distribution, that needs to come along with knowledge so that they understand how to conserve their water. And so, it's a bit stressing sometimes for someone like me, because I'm privy to a lot of these amazing conversations that you guys have. And as Fran said, usually it's the technocrats talking to technocrats. That conversation is awesome. But when you guys are talking to us, lay people, we need to understand what it is that we need to do to save this planet, but in a way that we could digest and that we could re-educate other people.
Right. Yeah, and that's like that sort of typical sort of, this is funded by X bank, we're not going to name who it is. They invite community members to learn how to conserve water, but generally you are inviting people who are typically interested anyways in how to conserve water, right? And you're probably missing out on a huge chunk of people who don't even understand why we need to conserve water. And they probably just think that the water not coming through my pipes is just the government not doing their job. And so, yeah, it's a huge sort of breaking, not an echo chamber in this case, but a communication link and an opportunity, as you said, that is really not coming knocking, and you just have to really take it and run with it. So thanks so much, Nisha. We will definitely get back into some of these with the panel session. And now I'm going to jump to our final panelist, who is Dr. Shelian Cox. So you can join us as well. And you are a researcher at CERMES and previously at the Caribbean Institute for Meteorology and Hydrology. Now, again, let me know if I got my LinkedIn token right. Massive amount of research that you've done on fishery stakeholder engagements. We're very excited to have you here because you've worked with people on the ground. You see the first-hand impact of climate change that it's having on these communities and their livelihood. And climate change sounds really good, but I think we as academics as well have a privilege when we tell people about climate change. But if it's affecting your livelihood, are you that concerned about you know, something that we might be more concerned about, or are you concerned about feeding your family and making an income? And so I think sometimes there's a serious disconnect in the translation of communication and points there. So what are some, and I know you've been involved as well with sargassum, which is by all means one of the most pressing issues in the Caribbean in terms of our coastlines. So that being said, it's a pertinent issue like climate change that needs action now. So are we communicating this effectively, and are we targeting the right audiences? And I want you just to focus a little bit on sargassum when you can, just because I know it's something that a lot of people are really interested in, and we can use it as a sort of proxy for other examples associated with climate change and its issues in the Caribbean.
Yes, thanks for having me, and pleasant good morning, good afternoon to everyone. It gives me a great pleasure to be part of such an esteemed panel and hearing all the points going on this morning. And, you know, you introduced me, I'm very much an ocean professional and sargassum, and, you know, I was coral bleaching at one point. But I think the conversation this morning, I think what I would really like to add is the importance of traditional knowledge and integrating that with science, and it's a part and parcel about, you know, working with people on the ground and showing them how much value the traditional knowledge has, and how even integrating that with science could help with climate adaptation. For example, you know, fishers, farmers really big into the lunar phases. You know, this really, you know, helps them to plan their operations. And, you know, even using that and helping them to work towards, you know, getting the messages out there. What we did was an innovative calendar looking at, you know, 4 leading ladies in the Caribbean fisheries. And we put the moon phases in the calendar. So, you know, everybody wanted one because they also had the lunar phases in there. But in there, we had messages about, you know, empowering women to be, you know, more vocal in fisheries management issues, you know, highlighting for, of course, we didn't have the budgets. Another issue where a lot of our projects, the percentage for communications and promotional materials is always the least, sometimes 1% in many cases. But, you know, that was something good that we did. In terms of fisheries management, I know we focus on a fisher lady. Of course, we know there are some exceptional fisher ladies in the Caribbean, but even those like the administrative officer of the Caribbean Network for Fisher Folk Organizations, you know, we featured them across the value chain with these positive messages and still try to bring in the lunar phases. So being innovative with communications, and, you know, we've tried, of course, and would love more funding to do greater things. But in terms of fisheries management, I'm thinking about guerrilla marketing as well to really get laypersons' attention. You know, guerrilla marketing is very unconventional. You know, you can use like crosswalks to catch people's attention, art, murals and designs. And, you know, working with the fisheries industries across the Caribbean and trying to communicate these messages. I worked with CNFO2 on a social media campaign. We did it for almost seven months. And what we found of the posts that did it best were the Wednesday Woman and Friday Fishers features, which, of course, you know, looked at, you know, a different fisher lady in a country, and, you know, what they were doing at the local level to promote the ecosystem approach to fisheries. And, you know, all of these posts performed better than, you know, any information about the concept itself or any FAO type publication that we were trying to promote. It was the stories, the people that they want to see, those people making the influence at that level. And even working in the science policy interface with fisheries and trying to communicate, you know, what we're doing as science with policymakers and how are we trying to tailor the information. Yes, we think about, okay, who the target audience is, but we don't necessarily really think about tailoring. like tailoring, what are the implications of our findings to the tourism sector, to the fishery sector. And this led to my work on the Sargassum Outlook Bulletin. We produce it every 2 months. I recently left CERMES and I'm now on my own, but I will continue to do the bulletin until next May. But, forecast, all the science before forecasting is a bit complicated. Even with our scientific lingo, this goes over the heads of lots of people who really need the information. The persons needing the information are the sectors that are, being impacted, like tourism, fisheries, the environmental sector. And, even the entrepreneurs as well, because we're seeing lots of innovation in sargassum. And we need to tailor the information so that the implications are communicated. Right now, we're working on a 6-month forecast, but our users of the information are telling us, we need a longer lead time. We need a year in advance, because if someone is going to invest in a sargassum related project, we need to know that there's a consistent supply. And if there isn't a consistent supply of sargassum, how do we go about storing it or are trying to supplement in years when sargassum isn't in those large quantities?
Yeah.
So it's really a user interface. I heard Fran speaking earlier about climate analytics, and of course I spent 4 years at the Caribbean Institute for Meteorology and Hydrology, and a lot of the work we were doing there was interfacing with the 6 climate sensitive sectors. Water, energy is now on board. And that strategy was to have a sectoral consortium. So all of the regional sectoral organizations sit at the table with the Caribbean Institute for Meteorology and Hydrology. The 5 Cs is an observer as well there. And in this forum, forecasts are presented. There's discussion on sectoral implications, and those sectors go back to their stakeholders and share the information. There's also the Caribbean Climate Outlook Forum that happens twice a year, wet season, dry season. And, these have been virtual, of course, due to COVID, but were face-to-face forums. And while I was there, I worked on a Caracoff theater. So we were, wet season, dry season, we had, different skits. We had, of course, for one wet season, we had, people as mosquitoes. These mosquitoes were trained to, take over.
Yeah.
And their target was the climatologist, because he was giving out extra information. And, that was really good, because I got people from the different Met services, to act in those skits. Every week we did a drought tournament as well. So using games as well, experiential learning. The sectors, the Met services, everybody would be in that game, where, of course, there are wild cards. There was a forecast, there were wild cards, and a budget. But at the end of the day, you had this rich discussion from people from different sectors at one table that really helped to build on a solution.
Right.
So climate services, and while at CIMH, I was doing the coral reef bleaching bulletin, the drought bulletin. My colleagues, they're still producing that. We worked on the health there. So there's a tourism climatic bulletin there as well. We've been talking there about water and energy, of course, but, it takes time to, build those kind of products and make sure that it's operational, quarterly bulletins. But there's good work being done there at CIMH. And at CERMES, beyond sargassum and fisheries, that work around integrating traditional knowledge as it relates to climate change for adaptation. And we realized, of course, part of the sargassum problem too was how they were coping and adapting to sargassum influxes. And we found some fishermen, cutting a buoy in half and making holes so that the sargassum wouldn't get into their engine. So there's so much innovation happening at the local level and grassroots. And, we need to take that, even within fisheries learning exchanges across, countries. So we took groups from St. Kitts to St. Lucia, and then from Anguilla to St. Lucia as well. They saw the marine managed areas there. They saw the coral nurseries, and it was a very immersive experience over 3 days. And, they took back the information to their colleagues as well when they got home and did a session and showed the pictures. And something, that we want to continue as well with these fisheries learning exchanges. And, and just being creative with what we're doing, even, aligning ourselves with people like Nisha who have these, I've been telling people we need big budgets, we need big advertising budgets to really get the word across.
Well,
yes.
That's a good point to end on, because I'm now going to ask everybody to sort of join me so that we open up the panel discussion. But thank you so very much, Shelian. You touched on so many different points. I particularly resonate with the traditional methods of communication and sort of stepping outside of our box, particularly as academics, where we're used to speaking to people who understand us and realizing that half the time we're just probably in our own little echo chamber, right? So with that, can everyone turn on cameras, rejoin, and we'll get straight into our first poll. I'll ask the first poll to be brought up, which we're then going to probably get sort of canvass some opinion from the audience, where we're looking at issues in knowledge sharing. So if someone from the team can bring up that poll, that would be great. In the meantime, yes, so while the audience is sort of voting there, in the meantime, I'm going to come back to you, Fran, because there was a point on energy, particularly where, and Shelian mentioned it as well, when you're talking about technocrats speaking to technocrats. Now, in order for technocrats to speak to people who are non-technocratic and be able to really effectively communicate some really difficult pieces of information to sort of digest that is not necessarily going to be easily translated in layman terms, we need a lot of capacity building within the public to really gauge that. Do you think we're doing enough in terms of capacity building in the Caribbean to really help the public understand the sort of juicier bits of climate and energy that take a while to get across? Yeah, another loaded one. Sorry, there we go.
Good question. I think energy is a very challenging one for the region. However, I think it's one, if partnered and communicated well, can have such a significant impact in the region. The Caribbean in general pays more for electricity than almost anywhere else in the world. And so there are numbers that make sense to real people, make sense to communities, make sense to people who can make an impact and can engage on the issue. But I don't think that we have been doing a significant amount, and well, enough. And I would start with one of the reasons being climate change and environmental issues are typically under the realm of environment offices, sustainable development divisions, et cetera, the ministry that houses agriculture, environment, water, et cetera. Whereas anything to do with energy is in an entirely separate ministry, and their main lens through which they have traditionally looked at energy is energy security for the community. And so the conversation I have seen happening, over the past couple of years, Climate Analytics has been engaged in the region in supporting countries in developing their nationally determined contributions to the Paris Agreement. And a significant part of that is energy system modeling, looking at what your pathway should look like in 2030, 2040, 2050 onwards.
Oh, you're talking my field, yes.
And in many countries, the engagement between the Climate Change Office or the Environment Office and the Energy Division is seamless. Interestingly, it's very seamless. You're on the same page, but obviously looking at it from a different lens. Whereas in others, there's a pretty large football field between the two.
Right.
However, in communicating that and I do find what can help drive change within energy, especially in the way that utilities operate, is demand from communities and from private sector and from civil society, et cetera. And I don't see that happening enough. And I think that the information that is provided to those persons in a digestible way is not in layman's terms. And I think that that's where we can definitely make a difference, and not talk about NDCs and acronyms in the climate change realm, because nobody cares about that when you're talking about your electricity bill. And if you talk about your electricity bill and show how you can then make an impact on the broader climate, people will understand and will care more, I think. And so in that, I think we can make a difference there, and make a shift in the way that we communicate on that.
Okay, well, we've just had a poll and 90% people said, yes, we have inherent issues. Of course, it's another broad question, which then I would like to pull up an audience sort of response from Robert McKay that said, I put unsure to the answer to this question because who could possibly know? It's not a researcher's remit, and why would the private sector care? Anybody wants to comment on that one? No? All right. Well,
I guess I can answer here.
Tackle this tough one.
Yes, well, he has raised an important issue here. It's not researchers' remit. Yes, as academics, our goals are to, publish, grant funding. But I think if the researcher themselves at the core understands the importance of the work that you're doing beyond just getting a publication, it's not your remit, but it is your responsibility to make sure that those stakeholders have the information. And of course, sometimes it may take some work, but it's sometimes just as easy as piggybacking on things that are going on. For instance, I was in a meeting with some seine fishers the other day, and we were talking about the effectiveness of the Folkestone Marine Park here in Barbados. And, all he was saying is that, we just wanted scientists to come back and say it was working or not. You stop us from fishing in a space, but we have no clue. Did you take a baseline? Did you see what was there before? And and all it takes is really just going to a Fisher Folk Week event and asking to speak in one of the forums. I think it doesn't take a lot just to know how to integrate within the communities you're working with. And we thought inter-island exchange, and each sector has these calendar events all the time. Tourism has the State of the Tourism Industry Conference every year. Cardi in agriculture does. So it takes just a little research to really find out, what each sector has going for them. And then how can you interface to become a speaker, and sometimes these things are inexpensive to do. And
that raises a good question. Thanks for that answer, Shelian. That raises a question that I've always sort of had rattling around in my head is, we have all these events where we are reaching out to community, because a motif of this conversation is that we need to reach out to the people, and then somebody even put it in the chat, where they are, to really communicate things in context of their situation. And we have all these corporations and CESaRE, as Omar has mentioned, the stereotypical, they just want to slap their branding, look, we're doing education here in this community, But then the question then becomes, what next? How do we institutionalize that knowledge? How do we make sure that knowledge transcends generations and doesn't really just stop at that event? We have people who now know proverbially how to fish, but then is that sort of sustainable fishing method going to be translated into future generations? And do we then have to target something more fundamental educationally to not just knowledge share in a very sort of transitional way, but knowledge share that's something that's fundamental in terms of how we sort of understand and grapple with these decisions? I don't know if I'm even asking a question, but I'm going to put that out to the universe and see how this lovely panel handles it. I don't know. Yes, Omar.
Yeah, I can sorry, I can maybe jump in here just to mention that I'm not anti company.
No, never thought that.
But
Don't worry.
but I think, I can come back to the idea of collaboration. I think it's more than now than ever. I think it's incredibly important to co-create. I think that's one of the only ways that you can make sure that everyone feels included, especially in I think some of the comments about Ms. Turpin also mentioned the private sector as a stakeholder and everything, and that's absolutely true. And I think especially now, the Caribbean needs, it is advancing. I think we've seen a lot of the, especially financial entities, sort of moving towards this idea of sustainable finance and what that means. A lot of the other conglomerates maybe a bit slower than some of the financial institutions. But I think private sector companies are understanding that they are missing out on a huge niche, and not just an opportunity niche, but a sort of policy and barrier environment to expanding their business even outside, even in Latin America, and definitely to places like Europe. And I think the idea is, as civil society in particular, even academics, the only way that private sector, I think, can effectively harness and take advantage of some of those opportunities and get around some of those new quote unquote obstacles, but in reality, it's good for the planet, is to partner with civil society or academia to get the license to operate for once. It's not seen as the greenwashing CSR, and to partner with academia to be able to implement, these concepts of science-based targets and similar approaches. So there has to be a natural collaborative bit of working. So I think that's one thing the Crabbe Foundation has been doing over the last 2 years. We've been slowly but surely working on this regional natural capital initiative that's aiming specifically at private sector and aiming specifically at encouraging private sector institutions, primarily some of the larger conglomerates, to embrace concepts of natural capital accounting using the natural capital protocol and similar approaches. Of course, it's a slow haul, but it's happening. So I think that's incredibly important, and it comes back to this idea of not, to embrace these other sectors as collaborators and not just persons to get around or to get funding from and move on. So I think, again, it's incredibly important in terms of messaging, if you are working with private sector or intend to work with private sector, that it's not just about helping them with CSR. It's actually educating them on the fact that, listen, there'll be a point in time over the next couple of years that if you don't move in this direction, you're not going to have a market anywhere else in the world. So it's in your own best interest to start thinking in this way and partnering with the persons who can help you get to that particular market that is actually putting sustainability as a primary sort of market driver.
Right. Yeah, that's all very good points. And now, Nisha, I'm going to pick on you because we're going to pull up the next poll. And this one is around the most effective post-event actions. It's not necessarily marketing, it's more the communications. But while that poll is loading for the audience, I wanted you to probably touch a bit more. Both you and Shelian spoke about the sort of limited budget that has been placed on really doing either guerrilla marketing or any sort of communications around this. And very often we in the Caribbean probably don't, respect the value of marketing and communications if it's not a party, right? I won't even get to the second part, but we tend to do promoting Carnival exceptionally well. But when it comes to climate change, here you go, a little $20, go ahead, be creative. How do we get funders, especially, to see the value in a large chunk of your money going towards the dissemination of information and not only just the implementation of a project?
So as I said before, and you're 100% right, I think this is a major problem within this space. I think that if we were able to put a quarter of the amount of money that Trinidad spends on marketing Carnival into marketing recycling plastics in Trinidad, the impact would be massive.
Yeah.
It's also a culture change. So you're marketing to change people's perception on how to live their life, how to change their life so that they can protect the planet and the people on it and the animals on it, and the fish in the ocean. And I know I've seen in Barbados, we have become very, very, and through private sector initiatives, very beach cleanup friendly. Right. So it started off with, and this was marketing. So it started off, and as Omar was saying about the private sector, with private sector sort of saying, we're going to have a beach cleanup. We're going to get the press to come and take tons of pictures of us on a beach, cleaning up, protecting our beaches and our planet. But it was really it was self-serving. It was their CESaRE. What happened was that you had all these other companies in Barbados following suit. Right. And all of their employees of every single company is now conscious of when they walk on a beach, they're picking up a cigarette butt or a plastic bottle or a shoe, because it's now become part of their culture. Right. If we were able, and this is a government, I believe, has a huge role to play when it comes to communicating and marketing these initiatives to change.
But does government do it well?
No, they don't. But they're the ones that have the budget. They're the ones that right. should be doing it.
Right.
I don't know what organization in, let's say in the Caribbean, like our organizations in the Caribbean they are scrambling for funding.
Yeah.
And as I said, we fund a lot of grassroots initiatives that just are doing such great work, but they have no money. Yeah. How are these organizations going to allocate part of their budget into marketing and changing culture? They just don't have it. I think it has to come from the top, I believe.
Okay, I'm not seeing the poll results. Perhaps James, if you can share those with us. Oh, sorry, yes, no, it went on another screen, forgive me. So most people, it's kind of across the board. We have 59% of people saying summary report of the webinar issued to key stakeholders, which I personally think is quite important, because you have a webinar, there are key stakeholders that you are trying to disseminate this information to. How do they get access without having to watch the entire webinar? The quick sort of summary, who needs to be connected with each other? I'm all for that. Obviously, permanent links to the webinar recordings and with promotion, because you can't just put the webinar up online and expect people to magically be drawn to it through hashtags. So you then have to get some creative promotion through that. Then we had the third highest after that was encouraging panelists to commit to at least one action with post-event follow-up. Gosh, so I think that means that we're all going to have to give an action here. Challenge accepted. And then after that, we went to one-pager committing host organization to actionable next steps. I mean, I'm pretty sure Island Innovation do a pretty good job at the dissemination of the summit afterwards, so we will let them off the hook there. And then polling the audience for key actions needed during the webinar. So I think if people were to put in the chat what they think are some key actions that they think that a webinar like this should take on, or you yourself as an audience member should take on, because I think very often in webinars, we lose that connection between the audience and we think we're speaking to the audience instead of really engaging with them. By all means, do share that in the chat. I think we'll probably go on to the last poll right now and then have a discussion around that as well. But before that, anybody has any comments or questions on that?
I wanted to jump in on a point that was made a little earlier on private sector, and then also on the need to how to support access to finance for non-state actors. And And a couple of the things that I've seen in the region is one, encouraging or ensuring that there is a non-government representative, at least one, on any form of governance body or decision-making, especially as it relates to climate action and climate finance. And that is critical, especially as it relates to knowing where the money is most effective or where it's most needed. In Antigua, they in adopting their environment legislation in 2019, I think it was, there's a clause in there, and they established the Sustainable Island Resource Fund, which is essentially like a revolving door mechanism in which they'll get funding from an international organization and then on grant or on lend to local smaller community organizations, I think even individuals in private sector. And there's a clause in there that says that the fund shall allocate a minimum of 15% per annum to non-governmental organizations. That's approved by the board. And I think that that is a really important first step. I know that it's only very recently been kind of established, but there are ways that the government can institutionalize and support the feeding of funds to that community level. I think an example of where private sector has made a really critical impact in Barbados is through Megapower, the EV sales company. I think without the approach that Megapower took as a private sector entity, electric vehicles would not be so prevalent in Barbados. And they did an amazing job in their communications and their knowledge sharing and understanding of the market, et cetera. And I think that that's a really good example in the region where the role of private sector should not be understated in the transition.
Yeah. No, that is a great example. And I mean, even when I'm doing research in the Caribbean on EVs, Megapower is quickly and easily found in these academic papers because it is seen as a leader, and Barbados on a whole is seen as a leader for really getting EVs up and running. And of course, the case studies, and each island has its own contextualization of how EVs can work and the financial mechanisms behind that. But it's good to see Barbados still take charge, and even if they may have had some sort of easier avenues to become a leader in EVs. So somebody did state that they would like a sort of Q&A session. We're not opening it up mic-wise, just because we have a few attendees, but we will be taking on some of your questions. So again, if you have any questions for the panelists, please present them into the chat. We can't get through all of them, unfortunately, but we will try to merge those that are quite similar, and we will try to tackle as much as possible. And if you have a particular question to anybody specific, do let us know in the chat, and we will definitely get to you. We have, from poll 3, we have webinars are seen as one of the top options. Virtual conferences, ding, 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 are seen as one of the best tools. And I think perhaps if I could chime in on why virtual conferences are seen as the best tool is that not only can you listen and engage, but you can also network. And this is where Island Innovation does a really good job in having these networking sessions. It is not always going to be the same networking session compared to being with someone in the same room. Some conversations can be a lot more organic in person, but virtually, if we're stuck in a virtual world and we can bring people across from all around the world that we wouldn't usually have with much lower carbon emissions. Webinars have their own emissions as well, but much lower usually than flying. I think it's a really good opportunity for people to, break silos, break echo chambers, and meet people outside of their usual spheres. Now, Omar, I think you wanted to get back to something within the chat.
Yeah, I just saw a really good comment and question from Stacy Alvarez, who I think is from Island Innovation, and she was asking about, how do we target youth as stakeholders? Yeah. So I just wanted to maybe come back to that a little bit, and really, because I've done some work with some colleagues looking at Gen Z climate activists, and so we looked at about 80 from around the world. Well, only 10 from the Caribbean, 10 from Trinidad, and one of the things that we found, especially for the folks in Trinidad, and I'm going to maybe hypothesize that it could be applicable to some of the other islands, is that, you know, a lot of the sort of burgeoning climate activists have said a couple really interesting things. One is that they want to have real leadership opportunities because, you know, of course, Gen Z, you know, are sort of emerging earlier and earlier with sort of skills and competencies to be leaders. But they've said that there is not, you have a lot of these school competitions and you write an essay, you paint something, and but they're not interested in that. They want to actually have the opportunity to have, you know, experiences in civil society, in other organizations where they're actually actively participating in action around climate change, and not just slightly more pandering activities. You know, you sort of do an art competition or whatever. And so that was really interesting as somebody from civil society who thought that we did have, you know, a lot of opportunities. And they also said that, you know, they're not getting the support they need from organizations who are currently in the space, because they think that the Caribbean is a bit put off by more aggressive climate action, which is the kind of climate action that they want to do. They want to march and they want to do this type of, but a lot of them said that the groups that they would want to work with, civil society in the Caribbean, is probably not the most comfortable in that type of action. And therefore they're not able to get that type of support. So I think it's incredibly important to not just copy and paste youth engagement practices, even from a couple of years ago, and definitely not from other regions. And I think it's so incredibly important to just have a conversation to hear what exactly do they want to do, and then how can we support it, because it's a whole different language to even begin with, to talk to you know, that particular generation. And it's even a whole different landscape in terms of what they are comfortable doing and what they want to spend their time doing.
Yeah.
So I think if we are going to be doing youth action in any group, government, private sector, civil society, we can't just default to what we think worked a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
So I think that was a real eye-opener to me. Definitely, because I thought, hey, we were doing a good job. And they were saying it's nice to get a day off of school, but that's not where their energy wants to go.
Yeah. I mean, even 2 years ago, I had zero idea what Gen Z was. And then I found out I'm not in it. I felt so insulted. So
I wanted to actually say something
Nisha, I was going to
on
ask
what
if anyone
Omar
had
said.
anything to add.
I attended a seminar a couple of weeks ago where they sort of focused on how youth could actually change households. And they're the ones that are more able to change an entire household upwards than the parents downwards, meaning that we took an example of composting. If you ran a school project where there is a prize, and you had all the kids in the school going home and teaching their parents, this is how we have to separate our waste because we need to win this prize. We're composting at school. You're teaching an entire household how to separate waste and how to recycle and how to compost. And that, I think the action in the Caribbean is going to be from our youth. I think there's such few of us on this level. And we are making change, but when you hear the kids in the region and the entire Caribbean talking about their reefs and the fish and the beaches and tree planting, composting, and farming, it's exciting. Yeah. That's where the passion is. It's with them.
And it's also doing it in a way, like Omar said, where it's not sort of patronizing on the kids as well, right? Getting them involved with it so that they're actively realizing these lifestyle choices and how it can turn out into a better outcome in their future so that they take ownership. And I think that really resonated to me as well with Shelian's comment about traditional communication and reaching into the communities. When you really give the fisher people, for example, as a community, ownership of these projects, you can very often quickly see the teacher becomes a student, or the teacher even realizes that they weren't even teaching in the first place. So it was really these communities teaching them, and they were just giving them the tools to really unlock what they really need. And so, yeah, I find that very interesting. Yes, Shelian.
Yes, I totally agree with Omar and Nisha. I just wanted to add in, technology to the mix, and where, it's very exceptional to see kids coding right now and really contributing to solutions in all types of sectors, recycling apps. I remember at the environmental festival, there was an app where we could have seen the separation of waste and how much it weighed, and we had the youth involved there. And even as it relates with fisheries, and something I'm very excited about with the Barbados Environmental Conservation Trust is a project called DigiFish, which will see fisher folk putting trackers on their vessels and using that location data to see how fishing pressure change with time. And of course, I'm really targeting fisher folk and their children, to use this app, to use what they're landing, and, collaborate with the Fisheries Division and the Ministry of Maritime and Blue Economy, it's like part of participatory action research, right? Youth, as well as the older folk, working towards solving an issue together using technology.
Yeah, no, very good points. And I think also that sort of engagement with the technology also inspires a key element that I think is very often not cultivated enough in the Caribbean, which is entrepreneurial sort of activity around these issues. I think, it was one thing as a Trinidadian going to Jamaica, I found very refreshing. There is that inherent entrepreneurial sort of, we will make something. It may not be the best thing right now, but I am going to aspire to get this thing sorted. And I felt back home, I didn't necessarily have somebody pushing me to be like, you can be an entrepreneur, you can really push and change the issues around you. I'm not saying that's all across Trinidad, of course, there are generalizations, but I do think there's certain cultural aspects that we can learn into island that we don't necessarily have from within our own islands that we can benefit from. And I definitely see that we can encourage our children more to realize that the world isn't out of their reach just because you don't have the resources to hand to write code or what. You can really do a lot more in this day and age than I could have with my encyclopedia on the bookshelf. I couldn't really go and look up coding there necessarily as easy as it is the plethora of YouTube videos that I can get right now. So I think we really do need to encourage children and the youth, not just children, but the youth on a whole to engage in these issues, not just say that there's an issue and I need change, but also there's an issue, I need change, and here's how I'm going about solving it with like-minded individuals as well. Any other questions from the audience? We will give you some time to put that in the chat. If not, we'll probably move into the wrap-up session. Now, this wrap-up session, like I promised, comes with a challenge, and that challenge is one sort of action that you're going to give yourself to, when we exit this webinar. What do you think is something that you can give yourself in order to either help stimulate impact from the webinar itself? And don't say share the link, that we need something a little bit more than that, or something that you can do to sort of help improve the knowledge sharing in the Caribbean. If you want to donate $1 million, please, by all means, go ahead. Something actionable, big, small, just something that we hold ourselves accountable from the poll question. Who would like to start?
Is this us or the audience?
Yeah, you.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, one thing that the Cropper Foundation is doing, and we're hoping to expand to other islands in the Caribbean in this year, the remaining of this year, we launched this community and citizen journalism website last year for World Environment Day 2020, and it's specifically focused on bridging well, breaking a couple barriers, talking about echo chambers. It's giving a direct platform for persons from communities and civil society to publish their stories around the environment, which is another barrier because it normally, you have flooding happening and there's no link in the media to climate change. It's just flooding and rainstorms. So we created this website, CESaRE, CESaRE, and it's an online news platform that's dedicated for, again, communities, citizens, and civil society. And we trained in Trinidad and Tobago about 40 citizen journalists, and we've been slowly expanding to a couple of the islands, but we're hoping to formally do so and provide training on citizen journalism and what that can do. So we're hoping to extend that network. So if anyone is from a civil society group in another Caribbean island, please let us know. I will be providing free training, and it's a very sort of grassroots type approach, but we were able to get over 100,000 unique reads in a year. And all these are articles from community members talking about, very sort of local based issues around the environment. We also want to have a focus on climate change and youth reporting as well. So that's an action that I would really want to commit to, and I hope other folks would want to commit as well, because we need to get a good network of groups happening around the Caribbean.
Well, you already have someone, Patricia Turpin, in the chat saying that Caribbean is excellent. So
oh, great. That's nice.
Fans already there. So for the sake of time, we'll just keep it a little bit quick, and then just so that we can keep some wrap-up summaries towards the end. But anybody else wants to go next?
I might jump in and jump on. I actually have two quick commitments, one building on Omar's. The Alliance of Small Island States is trying to build out a regional network of comms, PR journalists. And so I'm going to first commit to put them in touch with that. But secondly, through our Trinidad office, as it starts to work, I think creating one challenge that we've seen is creating Caribbean specific and regionally specific communicatable science. Yeah. And I am going to be working with the team to support that and try and then capitalize on the use of existing regional organizations and existing platforms rather than duplicating that, because I feel like the internet is sometimes a lot to take on, and at the region we need some specific information that is tailored to our context and our communities, especially our Indigenous peoples and most vulnerable populations. So those are my two.
Excellent. Well, the stakes have been raised. Anyone else? Nisha, Shelian?
No, I think that through BECT, we're actually looking at starting a trust in Trinidad. And you have my word, Omar, out of this. My big action is that we're going to support you in really growing CESaRE, and I'm here to support you and do whatever I can to help really push that. And I think it's great and it's so important. So well done.
This is lovely. Our actions are helping each other as well. Shelian, before I go.
Yes, well, so many actions that I want to do, personal as well, but I'll maybe say three. I would like to work with Island Innovation to have a kind of a second round of this somehow. I thought the conversation was really good, and in terms of reaching different audiences as well. I know I'm basically the most salty person here
That's on the
call right now, but it would be good to get some of these messages to persons working in the marine space. We're a growing group over time. I think I want to, of course, share some of the useful links as well that I've seen today in CESaRE as well. I'm going to ask Omar if he will post a link to the Sargassum Outlook Bulletin on CESaRE as well. So I'll follow up with him on that. And of course, as my personal business and trying to launch it, I'm working on a social media campaign, fisheries related, of course, some, things I've been working on and trying to communicate that. So within the next couple of months, I will be starting that campaign online. And of course, it will be based on what the fishermen would tell me to post, because we're in constant communication and sharing more about the project DigiFish as well. There's so much happening, but thanks for having me and having this kind of platform where we can connect.
Yes, thanks so much for being here as well. So we got one more question from the audience. We have 4 minutes, so this one will have to be very quick. Maybe if you could give a punchy 2-sentence response. And it is a very loaded question. It says, how do we get governments to actually listen to and act on the suggestions of youth and community activists? That's a tough one. Yeah, I don't know. My head is also going like, I have no idea as well.
Well, one thing that we wanted to do for the last Trinidad and Tobago election, but I think is very applicable around the region, is that there's still, maybe not in Barbados, because we have a superstar there, there's still very little conversation on any political platform around environmental climate issues. It's barely ever a reason that someone votes a particular way. And I think we need to come up with some type of climate manifesto that's signed on, that maybe has 5 key actions, and that civil society groups, private sector groups, individuals, academics sign on, and we send it to every political party and say, this is this can move the needle in terms of votes and whatnot. So tell us which one out of these 5 you're going to commit to, and make it a part of your agenda.
Right. Well, besides being popular, you've also told Trinidad that they don't have a superstar, but I'll ignore that one. Yeah, this is recorded, Omar. So that being said, here's my commitment before I summarize, and that actually has to do with something that we were planning to do at CESaRE from a bit earlier on, but honestly, everyone's sort of opinions here has realized that I'm going to work with all of you in some shape, form, or fashion, and that is around a conference called Climate Gen Z. And that is really about how do we get this sort of youth activism and also train them in communicating what they want to communicate. Through various skills, whether it's coding, whether it's poster design, whether it's understanding the lingo behind climate science in the first place, whether it's about gaining funding for promoting their campaigns. We want to get people on the ground who are well and truly activated to be able to do all of these things. And so, Omar, you are a very popular person here. And so we'll be connecting with you, Fran. I definitely would love to connect with you as well with the Alliance of Small Island States. Nisha, you can never go too far with such marketing talent. And Shelian, thank you so much for all that you've parted knowledge with in terms of community engagement, as well as how do we effectively build stakeholder communications in the region. So we've jumped across everything from stereotypes in the Caribbean to broken funding arrangements to guerrilla marketing and fancy words like technocrats. And I definitely thank you all for joining us today. I definitely would like to thank the Island Innovation team, James, Sarah, Julie, I believe. Thank you so very much for all of those helping with the chat today, with the polling. I would like to thank everyone for joining us. And it is a Saturday. It is not the easiest time to listen to people talk to you virtually, but here we are, you stuck it through. So thanks so much. So on behalf of CESaRE and BECT, thank you very much for joining. And we will stick to these actions. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.